Hello everyone, so this is the first lecture on organ system, and then the organ system that we're going to be talking about today is the integument or the skin. It's the largest organ, okay? And again, it's composed of all the tissues. You have nerve tissue, you have muscle tissue, you have epithelial tissue obviously, and then you obviously have connective tissue. So the main functions, folks, is the physical and immune protection. And we're talking about physical and immune protection, that's actually what it is. It prevents the entry of pathogenic bacteria and viruses, okay, into your body. So that's your first line of defense. All right. So it prevents things. Water balance. Again, obviously, if you have no skin, you actually will lose more water. In fact, burn patients, people who actually suffer third-degree burns, actually always have a hard time keeping fluids in, okay, because obviously water evaporates in a hot system, which is the human body, which is 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's, again, it prevents us from like losing water. And temperature regulation. So obviously you sweat when you need to cool down, and obviously there's some shivering, but that's kind of more like of a muscular thing. But when we're talking about temperature regulation, we're talking more about cooling down. And vitamin synthesis. The primary vitamin that's synthesized by the skin is vitamin D, and we're going to be talking a little bit more about what vitamin D does like later. And then secretion. And when we're talking about secretion, we're talking about secretion that waterproofs you. We're talking about keratin, sebum from sebaceous gland that actually in this case moisturizes your skin. And to a lesser extent, absorption. And when we're talking about absorption, we're talking about transdermal absorption. So that's actually how transdermal patches actually work. Like so, I don't know if you notice, some nicotine patches are transdermal patches, and there's also some pain patches. Okay, depending on what kind of pain medicine you actually issue choice in this case. Okay, so these are the main functions of the integument, and we're going to be talking about the cells now that make up those things. So this is the integument. The integument, folks, are the only these two layers, epidermis and the dermis. The subcutaneous layer or the hypodermis is not a part of the skin. So only the epidermis, which is all epithelial tissue, and the dermis, which is predominantly connective tissue, collagen actually in this case. All right, and as you guys can see, there's a bunch of like organs here, and we're gonna look about the dermis a little bit more better here. These are called tactile cells. These are sensory receptors, and the sensory receptors in this case, actually, there's two types. And one of them is actually for deep touch, so like if you're grasping a heavy object, and the other one is for fine touch, kind of like if you're like brushing something or you're trying to feel the surface of something of a smooth surface. Okay, you actually also have sweat glands and sebaceous glands in there as well. And again, hair root, okay, is actually in here. Note that the epidermis, there are no blood vessels that actually in this case penetrate the epidermis. Okay, epithelia, as you know, is avascular, and so the way that the actual epithelia actually gets nutrients from the blood is through, so in this case, through diffusion. So it goes, so this blood vessels here release nutrients, and they go from an area of greater concentration to lower concentration. So again, please note that the skin is only made up of primarily of two layers. Okay, the dermis and the epidermis. So the epidermis, folks, is made up primarily of four layers. The stratum lucidum is only present in two areas, and that is in the palms of your hands and in the soles of your feet. Besides that, everywhere else you actually have stratum corneum, that's the most superficial, granulosum, spinosum, basale, the deepest layer. Okay? And I'm gonna spend a lot of time on this slide. The stratum basale actually has all, in this case, all living cells. So in the stratum basale, these are all highly dividing cells, proliferating cells. These are predominantly keratinocytes, which is the dominant cell type in your skin. And then you actually also have, in this case, melanocytes. Okay, actually this is the melanocyte, I'm very, very sorry. And you can also, in this case, have tactile cells, all right? And also there's actually macrophages, in this case, that actually epidermal dendritic cells, so that's actually an epidermal dendritic cells that actually can traverse all the way up to the granulosum, okay, coming from the blood here. this is actually your immune cell. Your epidermal dendritic cell is actually your immune cell. And again, it can be present all the way from the granulosum all the way down to the basale. Okay, it's not just the spinosum here, all right? So something weird happens with keratinocytes. So normally, what happens, folks, is if we take one of this keratinocyte, it's gonna take it 2 weeks to go from the stratum basale to the stratum corneum, and then another 2 weeks it's gonna span as part of the stratum corneum, and then it becomes the most superficial layer, and then it gets sloughed off. FYI, dust is predominantly dead skin cells. Okay, so, and the way that they actually do this is these are living cells and dead cells, dead cells, dead cells. So spinosum and basale are still, in this case, like actually spinosum is already like dead but intact cells. So what happens, folks, it's the process called keratinization. So keratinocytes inside their cells actually have granules full of keratin. Okay, so in the stratum basale, the keratinocytes do not manufacture amounts of keratin yet, or their keratin granules are still intact. Okay, but as they migrate up to the stratum spinosum, what happens is they start making, in this case, they start making keratin, and the way that they do that is once you start making keratin as a keratinocyte, keratin is actually toxic to the keratinocyte. So you actually kill yourself when you make keratin. Okay? But one of the other things before they do that, before they kill themselves, is they actually attach themselves to each other tightly through this structure called desmosomes. All right? And the reason why it's called stratum spinosum is there's a spiny layer. So each of those cells actually look like they have spines coming out. Those spines are actually desmosomes connecting adjacent cells to each other. Okay? And as we go up to the stratum granulosum, okay, you actually start getting really high amounts of keratin. And again, I'm telling you right now, keratin is not good for you. So you're dead. At this point, you're definitely dead in the stratum granulosum. All right, but you're still intact. You still have a nucleus, okay, but you're well preserved. It's kind of like when you have a dead body in its first week, you know, after embalmation, after embalming, okay, it's still intact, right? But after that, it starts degrading. All right. Again, stratum lucidum, folks, only happens in the palms and soles of the feet. In addition to keratin, which is actually what, again, is manufactured from here on up, what happens, folks, is stratum lucidum, the keratinocytes in this layer, actually create another protein called eladin. And the purpose of keratinocytes, keratin actually, is waterproofing, is one of them. Okay, and obviously the other thing is, and actually waterproofing, right? So that's basically the most important function. Eladin, on the other hand, actually, folks, actually has also an ultraviolet protection function. Let's talk about this other cell. So again, epidermal dendritic cells are your immune cells. So what happens is if a bacteria penetrates, your epidermal dendritic cells can actually eat it, phagocytose it, and then in this case, remove the offending microorganism. Okay, but if you have tactile cells, again, it's for sensory reception. What happens with melanocytes? So something weird happens with melanocytes, folks. Melanocytes create melanin. And FYI, white people, brown people, yellow people, black people all have approximately the same amount of melanocytes. What happens is the darker you are, the more effective your melanocytes are in creating this thing called melanin, right? So melanin is actually this pigment that is created by melanocytes. And what melanin does, folks, is it's actually for ultraviolet UV protection. FYI, note that UV protection, there's two types of UV, UVA, UVB. UVC is actually reflected back to space, all right? So this is a very important thing. If you think about it, melanin, folks, is sunblock, okay? So what melanocytes do, folks, is they spew out sunblock, and what the keratinocytes do, folks, is they basically take this melanin and basically, like, if you think of yourself in a beach, right, you actually then lather yourself with this melanin, protecting yourself from the ultraviolet radiation. Why is this so important? The reason why, folks, is in the stratum basale, especially speaking, your keratinocytes are rapidly dividing, okay? And what happens is ultraviolet protection can actually, in this case, degrade your DNA, right? So if your DNA becomes defective and you're rapidly dividing, the chances for in this case, an error-prone keratinocyte just going bananas and expanding itself is actually high, and that's actually how you get skin cancer. Okay, so just know that melanin, folks, is sunblock. That's all that is. All right. I'm not gonna spend a lot of layer on the dermis here, but just know that it's predominantly collagen fibers in this case. All right. So I'm not gonna talk about facelifts. So that would be an interesting thing. But again, we're gonna focus more on the epidermis here. Know all the layers, what each layer has, and the function of all of the cells in each layer. Okay. All right, folks. So what we're going to be talking about now is we're going to be talking about, in this case, glands. So there are actually multiple types of glands in your skin. We actually have sebaceous glands. All right. Sebaceous glands, actually, this is actually sebaceous glands. So they create sebum to the hair root. So therefore, what happens is actually waterproofs and moisturizes your skin. And then you actually have two types of sweat glands. This is called the merocrine sweat gland, which is the most abundant sweat gland, and it opens up directly to the surface of the skin. And this is predominantly water. This is predominantly for temperature regulation. And then on the other case, you actually have apocrine sweat gland, and that is generally speaking in your groin, in the armpit, and the nipples. Okay, and this actually become active primarily speaking during puberty, during adolescence. Okay. Sweat glands, specifically this merocrine sweat gland, is actually for temperature regulation. So you can see that there are blood vessels laying underneath here. So when you get hot, okay, I want you to think about it. So these are filled with water. You get hot, get really hot. Let's say it's a warm day, like today, summer in Wisconsin, right? Hot day, hot day, hot day. What happens, folks, is as the temperature of your blood rises, there has to be an escape, again, homeostatic regulation, correct? Homeostatic negative feedback regulation. So it's hot. What happens is your hypothalamus notices that. The hypothalamus is in the brain, the control center. And what happens, folks, is your blood vessels vasodilate. Vasodilation means this blood vessels become wider. And when it becomes wider, there's more blood flowing through this region. Now, I don't know if you know this, blood is hot. So when more hot blood is flowing through this region, guess what happens to the water in this merocrine sweat gland? It evaporates. And when things go from liquid to gas, you actually, in this case, this is actually an exothermic process. So what happens is you are actually releasing energy to the environment, and you're actually, in this case, losing heat energy to the environment. And that's actually why you cool down. Okay. The other way that you can think about this is actually a hot plate. So if you want to get rid of water, you turn the hot plate on, water boils. When water boils, heat escapes to the atmosphere. Okay. So that is actually how how skin regulates your temperature. All right. So again, primarily like in this case, a function of merocrine sweat gland. We're not going to talk about, again, apocrine sweat gland. Again, is in special areas. It's primarily taken over by your parasympathetic nervous system, or your sympathetic nervous system. And when you're nervous, that's actually why you sweat in your nipples and your groin and your armpits, among many other places. Another thing is hair. So what is the purpose of hair, folks? Hair is as an extension for sensation, right? So actually, and also the way you can actually do this is you can actually, in this case, release hormones to this thing, pheromones, and you can actually release it to the atmosphere, and actually other humans around you can actually sense that pheromonic expulsion. All right, so sensory function. The other function of hair, folks, is protection. Obviously, if you think about it, where are you hairiest the most? Okay, that's a personal question, but your head is where hair normally is. Well, guess what your head is exposed to most of the time? Well, the sun, ultraviolet radiation, correct? So there is a protective component to hair as well. The last topic we're going to be talking about is wound healing. So wound healing is actually in, you know what, I might have to do this in a different lecture here.